It's time for CBJ in 30, presented by Telhio Credit Union. Find us on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play Music, YouTube, and TuneIn. The easiest thing to do is tell Alexa or Siri to play CBJ in 30. Here's your host, Bob McElligott.
It's hard to believe that Thanksgiving has already come and gone, but that's the case. And today, the Christmas shopping season officially begins with Black Friday. It's also when the Blue Jackets will welcome a team that wears black and gold from Western Pennsylvania. The Blue Jackets and the Pittsburgh Penguins getting together for the second time this season. Welcome to CBJ in 30, presented by Telhio Credit Union. Coming up on today's show in just a bit, I will talk with Mark Madden. He is a talk show host in Pittsburgh. I think he is a Penguins authority, and you'll get his thoughts on where the Penguins are, what they're doing, and unfortunately for the Blue Jackets, what they're doing right now is winning, and in the case of their last game a couple of nights ago, winning big. But first of all, I want to talk about what happened to the Blue Jackets in their last game on Wednesday against the Philadelphia Flyers. It was a game where the Blue Jackets started well. They came out, they got the first goal of the game. It was Nick Foligno that got the goal, set the tone for the evening for the Blue Jackets, and then they started to get themselves into trouble, and it was penalty trouble that the Blue Jackets got into. Now, the first couple of power plays that the Flyers had, they didn't look good on at all. In fact, I think they had 2 shots on the first 3 power plays. But that was the problem. There were 3 power plays, and then there was a 4th one. And finally, Philadelphia figured it out, and they got themselves a goal on the board. Then eventually the game ends up tied at 2 goals apiece. And then to start the third period, Alexander Wenberg commits a face-off violation. He got knocked down to the ice. He took his glove, put it over the puck, and passed it with the glove. You cannot do that anymore. Once upon a time you could, and that once upon a time wasn't that long ago. It was just a couple of years ago, but that rule has since been changed. You cannot move the puck with the glove on the face-off. It's an immediate violation. It's immediately a delay of game and 2 minutes in the penalty box, and the Philadelphia Flyers took full advantage, and in doing so, the Flyers went on to win, beating the Blue Jackets 3-2 was the final score. Now, yes, they got themselves into a ton of penalty trouble in that game. That's not, that's a fact. There's nothing you can say about that. They took too many penalties. I'm going to be honest with you. It's easy to say, well, they were dumb penalties and this and that. You know, some of them I thought on other nights or in other situations might go by the wayside. But anyway, they didn't. They got called that night, and the Blue Jackets didn't do a good enough job of staying innocent. Right? They just kept on committing the infractions. Anything that was borderline was getting called, and they kept on getting called. So they put themselves into that spot. I'm not going to just blame it on the officials and say, well, they were all terrible. No, I mean, the Blue Jackets, they should have made adjustments. They kept on getting themselves into trouble. But after such a good start, then it just went away, and a lot of it was because of the penalties. John Tortorella talked about this in his post-game press conference. You just don't have the same flow when you are in the box that much. And that's because not everybody goes out on the penalty kill. I mean, there were guys in the third period that they weren't even on the ice. Alexander Texier wasn't on the ice in the third period. Emil Bemstrom was barely on the ice. Sonny Milano was barely on the ice. And that's twofold. And the first thing is they didn't have a good night. They didn't get the minutes that they normally do. They didn't get the minutes they get at 5-on-5. When the games are mainly 5-on-5, those guys are getting minutes. They're getting an opportunity to get into a flow, play their role, all of those things. But when there's a lot of penalty kills and they're not on the penalty kills, well, then that disrupts what's going on. And then by the third period, you get behind, you're trailing, you want to put out the guys that have gotten the most regular shifts over the course of the game. And so sometimes those guys get left by the wayside. And you can say that's right or wrong, but I'm telling you it's a fact. And that's what happened in that game. You get to a point where you're down by 1, and as time becomes a factor, you're going with the guys that you feel have the best chance to give you the offense that you need in that particular spot. So that's what John Tortorella did. He never did get that offense, and that also is because of 2 things. The Flyers did a good job of tightening up and locking down in the third period. Brian Elliott also made some big saves in that third period. They were key saves. It changed the complexion of the game. So the Blue Jackets lose that one 3-2. Their best line in the game, without question, was Boone Jenner with Oliver Bjorkstrand and Gus Nyquist. In fact, they, Nyquist and Bjorkstrand combined to set up Seth Jones on the second goal that the Blue Jackets got in the game, which was late in the first period, right after Philadelphia had tied the game at 1 goal apiece. So that was their best line, without question. They've got to be better tonight. And tonight, it is just a bigger challenge. That's a fact. This rivalry, I had somebody ask me the other day, I was doing an interview with somebody, and they were looking ahead to Friday's game, and they said, it's always fun. It's such a big rivalry. And my answer was, I think west of Cambridge on Interstate 70, west of Cambridge, it is a rivalry. But east of Cambridge, it's just not such a rivalry. And I picked that spot because, to me, that's far enough away from the Pennsylvania state line and outside of West Virginia. Once you get on to the west of Cambridge, you're getting closer to Columbus. And I think, not 100% sure, less Penguins fans the further west that you go. So, to me, that's why it's a rivalry at that geographic designation. But the fact of the matter is, the reason it's not a rivalry to the east of that is because the Blue Jackets have not been able to win enough against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, you can like that or you can hate it, but it's just a fact. There were 2 playoff series between the two teams in recent history. The Penguins won both of those. The Blue Jackets, it seems like every time there's a big, meaningful game, they're not coming out on the right side of that. And that's why it's just, quite frankly, not going to be a rivalry to many Penguins fans until the Blue Jackets start to win the games and win the games that the Penguins fans think that their team should win easily. Once you start doing that consistently, then you really have a rivalry. I mean, there is, again, where we sit right here, it is a rivalry. Where they sit, you still have to get their attention. Even after all these years, you still have to get their attention. And look at what happened earlier this year. The Blue Jackets went into Pittsburgh, second game of the season. Elvis Merzlikins made his NHL debut, gave up 7 goals to the Penguins that night. So that's the last time they faced the Blue Jackets. They had an easy night. They also had a pretty full lineup at the beginning of that game, although Evgeny Malkin did get hurt during the course of that game. Somebody else left that game with an injury that night too. And at one point, the Penguins had like 4 or 5 guys out of their lineup. They still are banged up. They're still without their captain. Sidney Crosby is out. He will be out for a few more weeks. Malkin, who had been out for a number of weeks after getting hurt in that Blue Jackets game early in the season, is back in the lineup now. He's coming off a huge night 2 nights ago against the Vancouver Canucks. And it just seems as though when Crosby is not there, Malkin plays better. When Malkin is not there, Crosby plays better. And that, quite frankly, is the advantage that they have in having 2 superstars on their team. Because one picks up the slack of the other when somebody can't play, and when they are both playing, they are a double threat. And that means you've got to face them on consecutive lines, or they can just put them out there at the same time if they want to, and that is a huge threat as well. So, the fact of the matter is they still have those 2 superstars, and as long as they have those 2 superstars, I hate to tell you this, but it's a fact, as long as they have those 2 guys, especially number 87, as long as they have him on that team, then they are going to be they're going to be a playoff team, in my opinion. I just think that they are. That's what they do. And then they bring in this cast of characters. Right now, Brian Rust is having an unbelievable season. He's another guy that missed time with injury this year. And then you've got the guy that leads their team in points, and it is Jake Gensel. A couple of years ago, raise your hand if you even knew who Jake Gensel was coming into the National Hockey League. My hand is not raised. Okay? So this guy comes in. Who's this? Jake Gensel. What? Well, let's see what he does. Another guy that they're going to try with Crosby and see how it works, right? Well, that has worked tremendously. But now, even without Crosby, Gensel is putting up points. And now we know, from the Blue Jackets' perspective, how dangerous Jake Gensel is, because he is a Blue Jackets killer. It seems like he has a goal in almost every game. He's had a couple of hat tricks in the regular season, in the playoffs. he is just he's a tough guy for the Blue Jackets to stop for whatever reason. I don't know what he does against everybody else, but I can tell you when he plays against the Blue Jackets, he is always noticeable. So I'm just talking about a couple of forwards right now. I haven't even gotten to the blue line where Chris Letang is still one of the best offensive defensemen in the game. Again, this team continues to have a good roster. They continue to play well, and they're doing it without a full lineup coming into tonight's game. But the Blue Jackets have got to be ready. What did the Penguins do a couple of nights ago? They played host to Vancouver. They got behind early in that game. They got behind by a good bit, actually, and they scored 6 times in the third period to win the game 8-6. Not necessarily a battle of defense and goaltending, obviously, by that score, but that's the kind of firepower that they have. They were able to put up 8 goals, and that's where they are coming into tonight's game. So, again, the Blue Jackets, they've got to be playing a good, tight team defense tonight. See, one thing about this Penguins team, I do think that it does bring out the best in the Blue Jackets. As I'm sitting here talking about, it's a rivalry to us, but not to them. I think for the Blue Jackets players, the ones that have been here for a while especially, this is a big deal to them. It's a really big deal to play against Pittsburgh, have a chance to beat Pittsburgh, and they're getting the Penguins at Nationwide Arena tonight, which even though they had their 4-game home winning streak snapped by the Philadelphia Flyers, they would rather be at home, taking on this team at home to see what they can do against them. So I do think the Blue Jackets will be jazzed up for this game tonight. I do think the players look forward to the matchup against this team. I'm just telling you, they better play that tight team defense that we've seen over the course of the last couple of weeks. You've got to be above the puck, as John Tortorella says. You'll be shot blocking. You have to do every little thing right when you play against the Penguins tonight at Nationwide Arena. The Blue Jackets are going to have a very thin margin for error, so they've got to be on top of their game and ready to go. Hopefully, they're going to be a little bit more energized too. I'm not making an excuse for them whatsoever, but I did think as that game went on Wednesday night, they did look a little bit tired. And, you look at you had the 3 games at home last week, flew to Winnipeg on Friday, played there on Saturday, actually stayed after the game on Saturday, came back on Sunday, and then had a play game on Monday, day off on Tuesday, play on Wednesday. They did give them yesterday off on Thanksgiving, and that was not for the holiday. It was due to the fact that they just need some rest. I mean, this is a 4-game week that they're in the midst of right now. And I'm talking about starting on Monday. I'm not even talking about the Saturday game against Winnipeg. It's a lot of games in a short period of time. So even though you may be one of those people that thinks that if you lose, you got to get out there and practice because you got to get better, the fact of the matter is they needed the day off yesterday. They got it, and now they have to come with energy tonight to take on the Penguins. Talk more about the Penguins in just a second, but right now I want to tell you about my good friends over at Telhio Credit Union, who are going to be at the game tonight. I know that because back in the summer, in July, I worked with the folks at Telhio Credit Union in the steer show out at the Ohio State Fair, and we have some winners of a package that they purchased, it was a fundraising thing, so they purchased a package. They're going to be at the game tonight, so Telhio people will be at the game tonight, and I look forward to seeing them. But to take it a step further, for you, what can Telhio Credit Union do for you? They can do a lot of things, whether it's just simple things like checking and savings for you personally. Maybe if you have a small business, they can help you out there. But right now, as we get into this Christmas shopping season, they can also make your holiday wishes come true, and they could do that with a holiday loan from Telhio Credit Union. If you need cash for a big purchase, maybe a special gift you want to get somebody, you don't have quite the money that you need, you can use it for that. Maybe you're going way beyond and you want to have a winter getaway. Well, there you go. This will provide you the money for that as well. Maybe it's just the need to pay off some high-interest credit cards or consolidate your debt. You can get the cash you need right now with a personal loan from Telhio, and the rates. That's what happens when you mix your words. The rates are lower than most credit cards. Find out all you need to know by going online to telhio.org or stop by one of their local offices. Tell Ohio Credit Union is open to everyone in Central and Southwestern Ohio, and they are federally insured by NCUA. Well, whenever I need to talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins, there's only one source, in my opinion, to go to, and that is to Mark Madden, who is a talk show host in Pittsburgh on 105.9, the X, the flagship station of the Penguins radio network. And, Mark, I'm just going to get right into it with you. You know, the reports of the Penguins' demise, once again, have been greatly exaggerated, as you would say, as Pittsburgh has battled through injury, and here they are just doing exactly what they do each and every year, aren't they?
Well, actually, maybe a bit better than that, Bob. I don't think their record reflects their level of play. I think, and several players have agreed with me, that they're playing their best all-around hockey, fundamentally, structurally, and yes, skating and skill, as is the Penguins' trademark. Their best hockey since the Cup years of 16 and 17. They've had a couple tough losses, and actually the other night, they got pretty much outplayed by Calgary, but managed to eke out a win in overtime. Bad luck finally turned to good. They've been victimized, so it was nice to get even a little bit with that victory in extra play. But yeah, the Penguins are playing really well, and that's despite a plethora of injuries, most notably, of course, the captain, Sidney Crosby. So if they can survive without Sid, and I expect he'll be back in a little over a month, then they should really be ready for a good run. I mean, it could be a blessing in disguise if Sid's that much more rested for the games down the stretch, and let's hope the postseason.
Well, you know, you look at with the last time the Blue Jackets and the Penguins got together, it was back at the beginning of the season, just the second game in, and Malkin got hurt in that game, and he was out for a couple of weeks. And you've watched this team long enough to be able to give me an answer on this question. Why is it that when Crosby is out, Malkin plays better? When Malkin's out, Crosby plays better? It just seems like it's that way every single time.
It does. I'm not sure that's anything more than coincidence, and maybe, you know, more opportunity afforded, that much more ice time, that much more time on the puck, on the power play. Gino's not dominating in the traditional Gino sense right now with Sid out. We got to remember the guy's 33 years old, and that doesn't mean he's near the end of the road, but it means maybe he has to dominate a different way. One thing Gino's done really well since he returned from injury, he's playing 100 feet. He's not taking penalties. Gino led the Penguins in penalty minutes each of the last 3 years, but he's only taken, I think, a couple minors to date this season. He's moving the puck well between the blue lines, none of the egregious turnovers at each blue line that honestly was a trademark for him last year. I hate to disparage Phil Kessel, but him leaving has been a godsend in terms of regenerating the team's structure and their discipline and getting Gino on the right path, too, because sometimes when Gino and Phil played together, and this is last year, it's just that Phil comes with an expiration date. I think that's been proven over his career. The guy's just a little bit over 30 years old, and he's already on his fourth team. But sometimes dumb went to dumber when those two played together. Right now, Gino's out there with Gensel and Brian Ross to his fill in the net, picking up where he left off last year on a hot streak. It's been not vintage Gino, but very effective Gino.
You just mentioned Jake Gensel, and of course, people in Columbus know all about him. He's been a Blue Jackets killer ever since he's gotten into this league. But I guess one really good thing about him is, you know, he found that niche working with Sidney Crosby on his line. And when Crosby goes out for a long period of time, maybe you wonder, you know, is Jake going to be able to perform at the same level with somebody else? But as you just said, look, he leads that Penguins team with points, and he's working well with Evgeny Malkin. So that hasn't been a concern, has it?
He's a coach's kid, Bob. I remind people of that all the time. His dad was a junior A coach, was the longtime assistant head coach at the University of Minnesota. He can adapt, he can adjust, he can overcome. That goal he had in overtime against Calgary was a thing of beauty. Took a little skate down the left side, and the minute the defenseman bit just a little, he used him as a screen and fired it to the far side. Jake's just so fundamentally sound, very skilled as well. And one thing about him I've always said, he looks so unthreatening. For a dominant player, he doesn't look the part. I always say he looks like a Muppet. And just the stuff he does seemingly out of nowhere is tremendous. And he plays 100 feet, too. There's no doubt in my mind if called upon, Jake Gensel could be one of the best centers in the league as opposed to wing. He's that complete a player.
Talking with Mark Madden from 105.9 The X in Pittsburgh. Blue Jackets and the Penguins getting set to go head-to-head. I want to ask you, you mentioned when you were talking about Malkin, you mentioned that he's 33. You mentioned Phil Kessel being 30. And I was having a conversation at the rink the other day about the number 30. I think 30 in the National Hockey League now is almost, it's certainly the beginning of the end. It's almost closer to the end. Would you agree that the way this league is, as young as it is, 30 has become what used to be 35?
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of that was triggered accidentally because the younger you are, Bob, the more affordable you are. So it was the cap and the price tag that goes with older players that kind of moved the league a little bit younger. And the stuff we're talking about now is sort of a byproduct of that. Now, the exception to that rule will absolutely be Sidney Crosby. Sidney Crosby will be very productive well into his late 30s and maybe even 40 if he chooses to play that long, which I think he will. But, I don't want to say that when guys hit 30 it's a downhill trajectory, but I think the teams kind of look at them that way, the GMs and coaches and so forth, and it can be sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, here in Pittsburgh, Jim Rutherford, the GM, and for that matter, Mike Sullivan, the coach, they, I don't want to say they like older players better, but there's a trust level there with the older players. Sometimes it takes a bit of time to shoehorn young guys into the lineup. Case in point, at the beginning of the season, Dominic Cahoon, who we acquired from Chicago in the Ole Mata deal, he was a scratch for a bit, even though he was on Jonathan Toews' line with the Blackhawks and did very well there. Well, now finally he's got a spot, and he's producing like crazy. He's a good hockey player. I thought he would be, and he's living up to my expectations. But here in Pittsburgh, they kind of trust the older guys just that much more.
When you talk about older guys, here's the one thing that I think the league loses when it goes younger like that. I think it loses a guy like Bill Guerin. And you, of course, will remember when the Penguins brought him in a trade, he was that guy that really put them over the top.
He was the glue guy.
Yes, he got them that first Stanley Cup in the Sidney Crosby era, and you just don't have guys like that anymore.
Yeah, guys like that, more to the point, they don't get a chance, do they?
No, they don't. It's not even thought of.
Don't you think that's expense more than anything, like I said earlier, that the younger entry-level guys, and plus it's become such a fast league that kind of dovetails into using the younger entry-level guys as well.
Yeah, and it's so disappointing because, with the game's changing all over the place, and I don't. Is it fair to say that this game is changing at a more rapid pace than the other major league sports?
Well, if it's changing for the better, because all the other sports are turning to excrement in front of our very eyes. I mean, I don't watch basketball and never will, and I'm proud to say that, Bob. But football and baseball, they're just getting worse at the major league level in front of our very eyes. Hockey changes, but I don't feel it ever sabotaged itself like those two sports currently are. By the way, one last thing about the age debate. To prove how much the Penguins like the older players, look how long McElligott played here. And this is just me talking as opposed to something I've heard. If the Penguins don't start winning more faceoffs, don't be surprised if McElligott comes back for one more run late in the season. Again, I've not heard anything to that regard, but he's still in the employ of the club. You know, every retired player wants to come back. That's a long shot, not a sure shot, but there is a shot.
Well, when you look in the GM's office there, Jim Rutherford, there's a great example of an older guy that maybe some thought, and I'll admit, when he first went there, I didn't know if he still had what it took to be a Stanley Cup champion. I thought maybe he was an older guy at the end of his run, but boy, has he ever – I don't even – I almost said, has he ever reinvented himself, but I don't think he has. I think he's just the same guy he's always been, isn't he?
He's got a young wife and an 11-year-old son, Bob. That'll reinvigorate you for sure. Yeah, no, I know Jim dating back when he was a player. I mean, I was a kid, but, you know, I did the thing where I waited around, got his autograph, stuff like that. I have very vivid memories of Jim as a goaltender. But, you know, I dealt with Jim when he was at Carolina as well with the media. He's the same guy. One thing that makes Jim, I don't want to say unique as a GM, but it's not a trait you see in every front office. When he makes a mistake, he fixes it. A lot of GMs, when they make a bad trade, they'll hold on to the guy too long or have the coach put him in a prominent position for too long by way of proving it was a good trade. Jim makes a bad trade, he'll get rid of the guy sooner, not later, and fix the problem. Case in point, Derek Brassard, who you know from Columbus. He came here, didn't fit. Jim got rid of him early the next season.
Well, there's one more thing I want to ask you about, and it's because you brought up Calgary a couple of times in this conversation, and I'm just going to ask you flat out, are the Penguins going to be the last team that Bill Peters has ever been a head coach for the Calgary Flames for?
That's a weird situation, isn't it? I wonder, why these allegations came around 10 years later. But if he did what he's alleged to do, I don't think he can coach in the NHL anymore. I always hesitate to indulge cancel culture, though. I think guys deserve a second chance, whether Bill Peters is worthy of that. Maybe that's up to some other organization to decide. What disturbs me is, I'm going to talk about this on my radio show a great deal today. Now people are trying to rope Ronnie Francis into it, the new GM at Seattle, because he was the GM at Carolina when Peters is alleged to have had a physical altercation with two of his players. And Rod Brindamore confirmed that today, but he also said, listen, I was an assistant coach. We handled it in-house, and nothing like that happened afterward. Why can't this just be handled in-house by an organization, and whatever they decide, everybody else has to live with? Why does the decision always have to seemingly go to the echo chamber and be ruled upon by the mob? I don't like that.
Yeah, and that's something. I saw Bob McKenzie on TSN talking about that. He said, hold on, because the real roller coaster next is going to be who was involved, who knew about it, who didn't say anything, and that is a very slippery slope once you hit that.
Yeah, but like Brindamore said, Ronnie fixed it. I mean, Ronnie addressed it. They decided Bill Peters was worthy to retain his coach at that time, and it never happened again in Carolina. I feel bad if Ronnie gets swallowed up on this because I worked with him for many years when he played here in Pittsburgh. Bob, there has never been a straighter shooter, both as a hockey person, player, and a man, than Ronnie Francis. The last guy who deserves to be besmirched by this in any even remote fashion is Ronnie Francis.
Well, again, changing times in the NHL, as you said, for the good of the game. But on the other side, I think some of this stuff is just hitting the NHL like it has other sports for years.
Bob, let me make a not so bold prediction here. Cancel culture will get me at some point too, because I talk a lot. I'm glad I saved enough money for retirement, and because of that, someday this tape will be a collector's item, and you can sell it for big money.
Well, that's very good to know, and I'm going to try not to get into that.
Maybe not big money.
I'm going to try not to get into that race with you, though, as far as who gets cut first. Mark, thank you so much. Always appreciated, my friend.
Well, this was great. Again, I love the Penguins-Jackets rivalry. How's that Elvis kid? How's he done since we blew him up?
Well, he's still looking for his first NHL win. He did go to the minors and picked up a win this week for Cleveland. So it is a work in progress. He's gotten better, which I know you would say he only had one way to go after giving up 7 against Pittsburgh. He's gotten better, but he's finding out that this is not the Swiss league. It's the best league in the world, and there's just room to improve. That's all.
On a serious note, Teddy Bluger, who's also Latvian, says how good he is. And I don't know if you noticed this, but Teddy scored, I think, the 7th goal against him.
Yes.
He didn't celebrate it. He was actually visibly upset by it afterwards. But tell Elvis that if he can't be Sun Records Elvis, he needs to at least be Jumpsuit Elvis.
I will make sure that he knows, Mark. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks again.
That is Mark Madden from 105.9 The X in Pittsburgh. Tonight, the Penguins will be here at Nationwide Arena to take on the Blue Jackets. The puck will drop at 7 o'clock this evening. Our pregame coverage will start at 6:30 tonight on the Blue Jackets radio network, which includes the flagship station, 97.1 The Fan in Columbus. You can also hear the game at BlueJackets.com. You can get it on your phone by going to the Blue Jackets app. And also tonight we'll be on SiriusXM NHL Radio on the main channel, Channel 91, so you can find the game there as well. Blue Jackets and the Penguins getting together on this day after Thanksgiving, and the Blue Jackets looking for a win before they hit the road to take on the New York Islanders tomorrow night. That's going to do it for today's edition of CBJ in 30, presented by Telhio Credit Union. I'd like to thank once again Mark Madden, my guest today, and until tonight, I'm Bob McElligott saying so long.